Have you ever felt like talking to your adult child is like talking to a wall, or worse, like striking a spark in a dry field? Have you been left with that bitter feeling in your chest after an exchange where voices rise, eyes harden, and you end up more hurt than before, wondering when everything changed? There's a silent cause that goes beyond upbringing, generations, or manners, a deep, almost invisible root that many older adults carry inside without realizing it, one that's affecting their dignity, their peace of mind, their right to be treated with respect. It's not weakness, it's not guilt, but it is something that can change. I've seen it up close. For years, I've walked alongside women like you, mothers who gave everything, who held it all together, who loved without limits. And now, instead of warmth, they get shouting. Instead of being heard, they get indifference. Instead of conversation, they get contempt. It's not fair. But more importantly, it doesn't have to be this way. Today, I want to show you a different perspective, a way to respond when your adult child disrespects you, one that doesn't involve arguing, giving in, or fighting. A response rooted in Stoic wisdom, one that not only calms the fire of conflict, but brings serenity back to your soul. It doesn't require yelling. It doesn't need tears. Just an internal decision, one that can change everything. Stay with me. What you're about to hear could transform how you face conflict, how you stand in the face of pain, how you relate to yourself. Because this stage of life isn't about putting up with more. It's about living with peace, with dignity, with truth. Let's begin. The truth is, as painful as it may be to admit, all of this has a name: the normalization of disrespect. We get used to it almost without realizing it. We start accepting that our adult children speak to us harshly, ignore us, belittle us, as if that were just a natural part of life, as if growing older came with the obligation to endure. But that's not how it's supposed to be. So many older women live through these situations in silence, and they do it with a mix of shame, guilt, and resignation. Because really, who feels ready to say out loud, "My son treats me badly"? Who wants to carry that emotional weight, knowing everything a mother has given? And yet that unfair treatment, that tone of disdain or indifference, starts to sink in, day after day, until it becomes a form of invisible violence. Invisible to others, but brutally real to the one who's going through it. What begins as a sharp remark becomes routine. What once hurt becomes normal. What used to be an exception becomes the way you live together. Often there's no shouting, no direct insults, but there are cold gestures, wounding silences, apathy. And that hurts too. It hurts because it comes from the one you've loved the most. It hurts because you've known that face since it was a baby, and now you don't understand when it turns so hard. But here's something important to make clear. This doesn't happen because you failed as a mother, or because you're weak or too kind. This wound often comes from a cultural message that taught you to stay quiet, to not make waves, to always put others first. A message that praised sacrifice and punished boundaries, that taught you to give, but not to protect your dignity. That's why, today, instead of looking for someone to blame, we're going to face this pain head-on. We're going to name it. Because only when you name it, when you recognize it, does it start to lose power. And what comes next is a revelation that could change the way you relate in that bond, not to break it, but to transform it. With firmness, with self-respect, with wisdom, because you deserve more than just putting up with it. You deserve to be respected, and that starts with you. The second point I want to share with you has to do with a practice as ancient as it is forgotten and yet essential for those who have lived much: active silence. This is not resignation, it's not indifference. It's a kind of silence that comes from inner strength, not weakness. It's the ability to not respond to shouting with more shouting, to not play the blame game, to not feed the conflict, not from passivity, but from a place of firm and conscious presence. This silence is not empty. It's full of intention, of composure, of a deep understanding cultivated for centuries by Stoic philosophy. We can't control what others do, but we can control how we respond. And when that response comes from the soul, not from the wound, it holds tremendous power. When you choose active silence in the face of disrespect, you're not giving in. You're showing that you won't lower yourself to that level, that your dignity is not up for debate, that your peace is not negotiable, and that, although it may confuse someone who's expecting a fight, gradually begins to shift the dynamic, because the other person starts to see themselves reflected in a clear mirror. And often, when there's no one left to clash with, they begin to hear their own echo and feel shame. Science backs this up too. Neuropsychology studies have shown that disproportionate emotional reactions activate the limbic system of the brain, while reflective silence activates the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for rational decision-making. In other words, when you choose not to react, you're not only protecting yourself, you're helping the other person break free from their automatic impulses. You break the cycle of reaction and open the door to understanding. But this kind of silence takes practice. It's not easy, because staying quiet when you're being hurt is painful. That's why it's not about bottling everything up or holding in your anger. It's about finding moments to return to yourself, to breathe, and to choose from your center. That inner space no disrespect can reach, that place from which you can see clearly and respond with wisdom. The hardest part is this: many older adults have been taught for years that being quiet means surrendering. But what I'm proposing is exactly the opposite. It's learning to be silent as a strategy of strength, as a path to restoration. And here's where the deepest obstacle often appears: that little inner voice that says, "But if I don't say anything, they'll think they can keep treating me like this." Don't worry, we're going to face that fear together in the next part. Because yes, it's real, but it can absolutely be transformed. Third point, and perhaps one of the hardest to accept: not everything we teach as parents automatically earns respect. This is where we need to dismantle some deeply rooted beliefs, ones that might sound noble, but often end up working against us. The first belief says, if I gave everything for my children, the least I deserve is respect. And yes, that sounds logical, human, fair. But the problem is, respect isn't something you collect like a debt. It doesn't work that way. Respect is cultivated in the present. It lives in active, ongoing relationships. It isn't guaranteed by what we did in the past. Many mothers feel that raising their children, feeding them, sacrificing their own dreams should ensure they'll be treated with dignity. And they do deserve it, of course. But if that adult child hasn't developed the capacity to recognize what they've been given, if they lack emotional maturity, then they won't respond with gratitude. They'll respond with indifference or worse, with anger. It's not fair, but it is real. The second belief is even more painful. If they disrespect me, it's because I did something wrong as a mother. This idea destroys us from the inside, because now you're not only dealing with mistreatment, you're also carrying a guilt that paralyzes you. But that guilt comes from the fantasy of total control, as if being a mother meant having power over every future decision your child will make. That's never been true. Every child is their own universe, with wounds, with choices, with paths we may never fully understand. You could have been a present, loving, courageous mother and still have a child who doesn't know how to relate to you. That's not your fault, and you don't have to carry that burden. And then there's a third belief, very common in our culture: it's better to endure than to end up alone. This belief leads many older women to swallow their words, to settle for crumbs, to tell themselves, at least I still have them close. But at what cost? What good is it to have them in your home if every interaction feels like a battlefield? What good is avoiding external loneliness if the loneliness inside becomes unbearable? These ingrained beliefs have shaped generations of women who forgot themselves, who accepted unfair treatment out of fear, out of guilt, out of tradition. But today is different. Today you have the age, the wisdom, and the right to look at these beliefs and say, no more. No more guilt, no more forced silence, no more fear of being left behind. Because what comes next isn't a demand, it's a practical proposal, a new path to start living that relationship from a different place, not from confrontation, but from transformation, not from what's missing, but from what you can reclaim within yourself. Get ready, because this is where real change begins. Imagine you're standing in front of your adult child, and suddenly, something lights up inside you. Not anger, not sadness, but a new kind of clarity. You're not going to argue. You're not going to justify yourself. You're not going to explain why it hurts. Instead, you're going to do something much more powerful. You're going to hold your presence. This is the moment to integrate a simple but deeply restorative practice, anchoring your dignity in your own body. What does that mean? That every time someone, even your child, crosses a line with you, instead of reacting from the wound, you return to yourself, literally. You feel your feet on the ground, your spine upright, your breath soft. You take an inner pause, not to run, not to stay silent out of fear, but to remind yourself of who you are. This ritual, because that's how it should feel, like a sacred ritual, can begin even before the conversation gets tense. It can start in your kitchen, while you make coffee, whispering to yourself, "I deserve respect." It can continue in the living room, when you hear their tone rising, and you mentally repeat, "I'm not going to react the way I used to." And it becomes real when, in the middle of a tense moment, you choose to stay calm. Not with coldness, with firmness. You can also prepare a short phrase, something personal, intimate, that reminds you of your power. It can be as simple as, "I see myself," or "My peace is non-negotiable." You repeat that phrase inwardly while the other person talks, yells, or accuses, not as a shield, but as an anchor, as support. Because as long as you don't get lost in their chaos, you're still there, whole, present, worthy. Another part of this method involves doing something unexpected. When their volume rises, you lower yours, literally. You can say, "I can't hear you like this," and turn away, not to punish, to protect your soul, or you can stay, but without stepping into the storm. Look with calm. Let the silence become uncomfortable. Because sometimes the greatest act of self-love is letting the other person hear themselves, without turning you into their broken mirror. This doesn't mean you'll stop talking forever, or that you'll accept the unacceptable. It means responding from a new place, a place that doesn't require you to have the last word or to convince anyone. Just to be you, without giving yourself away, without lowering yourself, without losing your center. With time, this ritual becomes part of you. It settles into how you breathe, how you walk, how you see. You won't master it on day one, and you don't need to get it perfect. You only need to remember it in the key moment, that brief instant when you can choose between fighting or staying grounded, between breaking or rooting yourself, between repeating the story or writing a new one. A story where you are not the mother who endures, but the woman who honors herself. And even though this path may seem quiet on the outside, inside, it stirs up many things. That's why, in what comes next, we'll talk about the inner challenges that appear when you start setting boundaries from the soul. Because that's where many people feel like they're taking a step back, when really they're just beginning to grow. When an older woman begins to reclaim her dignity without raising her voice, Something deep stirs within her. But shadows also appear. Old fears, lingering doubts, quiet inner voices asking, what if he walks away for good? What if I stop being important to him? What if none of this makes a difference? These thoughts aren't mistakes. They're part of the process. They're the guardians of change. And your task isn't to defeat them, but to hear them without obeying them. The first obstacle is often guilt, that feeling that you're doing something wrong by standing up for yourself, as if setting boundaries were a betrayal of motherhood. But the truth is, you're not betraying anything. You're choosing to respect yourself. And that's not selfishness. It's emotional health. It's love that has grown up. A mother's love should not always hurt, and you don't have to pay for respect with your peace. Then comes doubt, the feeling of being alone on this path. Because often, when you choose not to engage in the argument, the other person pulls away or stays silent, and that silence feels heavy. But don't confuse it with indifference. Sometimes the other person needs time too, time to process, to rebuild. And you can't do that work for them. All you can do is hold your ground. Impatience can also show up. When will they change? How long do I have to keep doing this on my own? And here it's vital to remember, this isn't a method to change someone else. It's an act of personal restoration. The respect you're claiming isn't an outward demand, it's an inward return. A reminder that your worth doesn't depend on anyone else's behavior. And finally, sometimes sadness arises, because admitting that your adult child disrespects you also means acknowledging that the bond is wounded, and that hurts. But that sadness is also a doorway, a chance to stop pretending everything is fine, and start building something more real, not perfect, not ideal, but more honest, more human. At this point in the journey, what matters isn't getting everything right. It's keeping on. Keep breathing. Keep choosing calm over conflict. Keep practicing that active silence that doesn't shut you down, but lights you up from within. Because with every decision not to argue, you're telling yourself, I deserve something different. And yes, you do, even if it doesn't come right away, even if the other person doesn't see it yet, even if the echo takes time. What you're doing is not small. It's a courageous act that can change the ending of your story, and also the beginning of theirs. Because a child, even an adult one, learns from example. And the way you stand in the world can teach them something no argument ever could. That respect isn't demanded, it's embodied. Now breathe. Because you've already taken a huge step. What's left is to keep walking, with tenderness, with courage, with the kind of wisdom only you, after all you've lived, can offer. Maybe when you started this video, you felt a weight in your chest, a mix of sadness and anger you couldn't quite name. Maybe what hurt most wasn't the harsh words, but something deeper. The feeling that, despite giving everything, today you're treated as if you don't matter. But if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you still burns stronger than that pain. The desire to live with dignity. What we've explored isn't a manual for fixing a child. It's an invitation to see yourself through new eyes. To remember that respect isn't begged for. It's rooted within. With every silence you choose, every boundary you draw, every gesture that doesn't come from the wound but from clarity, you're planting a new seed, a new kind of love, more conscious, more mature, more free. You don't have to change your entire life overnight. One gesture is enough, one small but firm decision. Maybe that decision is staying silent when you used to shout, or walking away calmly when you used to stay and fight. Maybe it's writing down what you couldn't say, or whispering to yourself in the mirror, I respect myself. It's not too late. Your body still responds, dignity still blooms, and the soul, when it's given back its space, expands. Today, you can choose a new way to show up, not to please, not to convince, but to inhabit yourself with truth, with a peace that is not up for negotiation. I invite you to leave a comment with the phrase, "I am my center." Let those 3 words guide you like a compass when the world gets loud. And if you know someone, a friend, a sister, a mother like you, who needs to hear this, share this video. Sometimes a message like this arrives just in time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presence, your courage, your desire to live this stage with wisdom. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. 2 new paths await you on screen. Choose the one that speaks to you most, because what comes next can also be beautiful.